Drake, caught in the biggest legal nightmare of his career, and now a judge has just dropped a bombshell. After months of silence and secrecy, we've finally learned the shocking truth. The court has told Drake he is going to lose. Right? Not might, not could, will, and the consequences. They're worse than anything fans could have imagined. It started as a whisper in the industry, murmurs of betrayal, stolen songs, and confidential deals gone horribly wrong. But now it's a full-blown storm threatening to take down one of the biggest names in hip-hop, according to court insiders Drake's calm collected persona crumbled behind closed doors when the judge gave him the devastating news. And trust us, this isn't just about money. Lawsuit has opened the floodgates to years of personal vendettas, industry grudges, and shocking receipts that no one thought would ever see the light of day. What started as a business dispute has turned into a battle involving family, friends, and some of the biggest names in music. And the court is siding against Drake. So what went wrong? Why is the judge so certain? And how did it get this bad? You're not ready for what's coming next. It all began with a message. It's just one text allegedly sent late at night that set this entire lawsuit on fire. The message was from a producer who once worked closely with Drake during what many fans now call his golden era. He wasn't just some behind-the-scenes figure. This man had credits on some of Drake's most iconic tracks. But what nobody knew was that behind the studio walls, something sinister was brewing. Betrayal, ego, and years of resentment were bubbling under the surface. And when that text leaked, all hell broke loose. The lawsuit didn't start with a bang. It started quietly, almost like a whisper. A legal document filed anonymously in Los Angeles. The details were vague at first. Something about unpaid royalties, stolen concepts, and a non-disclosure agreement that was allegedly broken. But soon names were named. Accusations were made. And at the center of it all stood Drake, the man who has seemingly been untouchable in the music world. Until now, court documents revealed shocking claims. The producer, let's call him M, for now, accused Drake of stealing an entire project's worth of material back in 2018. Not just beats or hooks, but full lyrical concepts, vocal arrangements, and even personal stories that M claimed were his own. Fans initially dismissed it as clout chasing. But then evidence surfaced. Screenshots, studio logs, audio files with matching timestamps. Suddenly, the internet wasn't laughing anymore. Drake stayed quiet. Too quiet. And that's what made fans nervous. The Drake they knew. The Drake who famously clapped back in real time, who turned beefs into Billboard hits, had nothing to say. Not on Instagram, not on Twitter, not even in a surprise drop. Instead, his team went into lockdown. Publicists gave no comment. Lawyers refused interviews. And the silence only made the rumors louder. Then came the first court appearance. Drake didn't show. Instead, his legal team arrived looking tense, even shaken. According to courtroom insiders, the judge wasn't playing games. It's the initial hearing revealed something no one expected. There were other people backing M's story. Former engineers, assistants, even an artist who had once opened for Drake on tour. Their depositions painted a very different picture of the chart-topping superstar. Not as a genius collaborator, but as a controlling, credit-hungry opportunist who allegedly shut out anyone who challenged him. Emotions ran high. Inside the courtroom, lawyers clashed over every detail. Outside, fans were divided. Some believed Drake was being targeted, the victim of jealousy and revisionist history. But others, Others weren't so sure, especially when a certain unreleased track began circulating online. It was raw, unfinished, and clearly not intended for public ears. But what made it explosive was the voice on the track. Was Drake's voice unmistakable? But the lyrics, they matched word for word with a demo M had released on SoundCloud years earlier, buried deep in the archives, barely heard by anyone at the time. Now, the stakes had skyrocketed. The judge issued a formal warning to Drake's team. produce all project files and communications from the 2018 sessions, or face legal consequences. Reportedly, Drake was furious behind the scenes. Sources close to his camp described shouting matches, accusations flying across phone calls, and even tension within his inner circle. One insider claimed that Drake felt betrayed by his own people, that someone on his team might have leaked the files to M's lawyers. The idea that someone from inside might be sabotaging him only added gasoline to the fire. Meanwhile, M wasn't staying silent. In a now viral interview, he opened up about his past with Drake. He spoke emotionally, tearing up at moments, describing late nights in the studio, creative breakthroughs, and then suddenly silence. He said he was ghosted after the sessions, his calls ignored, his name erased from the credits. He told me it was family forever, M said, his voice shaking. Then he dropped the album, and my name wasn't on it once. Fans were shocked. The interview painted a human face on what had previously seemed like just another industry feud. Now, it was personal. And more people were coming forward. An old friend from Drake's early Toronto days posted cryptic messages on Instagram, suggesting that this wasn't the first time Drake had borrowed ideas without giving credit. Producers who once worked under OVO hinted at similar stories. The thread was unraveling fast, but the biggest twist was yet to come. During the second court session, the judge received a sealed envelope. Inside, a private email exchange. One that had been subpoenaed directly from Drake's email server. The emails, reportedly dated just weeks before the album release, showed a conversation between Drake and a top OVO executive, and the language was ... damning. One line in particular sent shockwaves. "Make sure M doesn't see a dime." He had his chance. Those 10 words changed everything, because they suggested intent. Not just oversight, but a deliberate move to exclude and erase. The judge paused the session, visibly disturbed by the revelation. According to one witness, the courtroom fell into dead silence. Drake's lawyers looked rattled. M's team exchanged knowing glances. And just like that, the momentum shifted. At this point, Drake could no longer remain silent. A statement was released, carefully worded, emotionally distant, but clearly crafted to control the damage. In it, Drake denied the accusations but admitted that creative misunderstandings happen in fast-paced environments. The internet wasn't buying it. Memes exploded. Fans dissected every line, calling it a non-apology and accusing Drake of gaslighting. The music industry was watching closely. Whispers spread that certain big-name artists were distancing themselves. One major collaborator quietly unfollowed Drake on social media. Another removed a photo from the studio they once shared. Insiders claimed that Drake's upcoming tour was on the verge of collapse due to internal conflicts. Some venues even began reconsidering their contracts, fearing protests or backlash. And yet, Drake refused to settle, according to sources. His pride wouldn't let him. He was convinced that if he gave in now, it would open the floodgates for others to come forward. But his lawyers, they were singing a different tune. Behind closed doors, they urged him to consider a private settlement, warning him that the judge's tone was shifting, and that jurors might not look kindly on what now appeared to be a pattern. Still, Drake stood firm. And then came the most dramatic moment, yet the judge's private meeting with both legal teams. No cameras, no press, but word leaked. And the message? Devastating. The judge had reviewed the evidence. All of it. The emails, the audio files, the testimonies. And after weeks of deliberation, the message was clear. Drake's chances of winning this case were minimal at best. One courtroom source quoted the judge as saying it would be wise to prepare for the worst. The words echoed in Drake's mind like a ticking clock. Prepare for the worst. Those 5 words, reportedly spoken by the judge, hit harder than any diss track ever could. For someone who had spent over a decade at the top, untouchable, Undefeated and unapologetic, the idea of losing and publicly was almost unthinkable. But now it was real. And it was closing in fast. His team was in panic mode. Crisis meetings were happening around the clock. Legal strategists were flown in from New York and London. A private PR firm was hired to craft a full-scale damage control campaign. Inside sources described the atmosphere as chaotic. Assistants running back and forth, phones ringing non-stop, heated arguments behind closed doors. One witness said it felt like a political scandal, not a music lawsuit. Drake, meanwhile, was spiraling. Emotionally, he was said to be unstable, snapping at friends, canceling studio sessions, even backing out of a surprise appearance at a major festival. One longtime associate revealed that Drake was barely sleeping, obsessing over every document, every post, every leak. He's not himself right now, they said. This shook him deep. But the drama didn't stop there. As the lawsuit gained traction, so did the noise around it. Fans began digging, and what they found only made things worse. Old tweets resurfaced. Cryptic comments from former collaborators suddenly made sense. A 2019 podcast clip of a lesser-known artist who once claimed Drake lifted her melodies went viral. Suddenly, the case wasn't about one producer anymore. It was about a pattern. The public narrative was shifting fast. Media outlets jumped on the story. Headlines read, "Drake's empire built on stolen art," and "The fall of a hip-hop king." Some publications even claimed to have insider recordings of Drake dismissing EMS contributions during a closed-door meeting. Whether they were real or not didn't matter. The damage was done. Public opinion was turning, and fast. And then came the betrayal that no one saw coming. One of Drake's former, closest friends, someone who had been with him since the early Toronto mixtape days, broke his silence. In a shocking Instagram live session, he dropped bombshell after bombshell. He claimed that Drake had a long history of pushing people out of credit deals, renegotiating splits behind their backs, and using non-disclosure agreements to keep mouths shut. Drake's a genius. Yeah, he said, but he's also ruthless. If you're not useful to him anymore, you're done. Period. The live was over an hour long and amassed over 2 million views in just a day. Fans were stunned. The betrayal wasn't just professional now, it was deeply personal. People who had once defended Drake were now questioning everything: his silence, his actions, his loyalty. Even his music began to be scrutinized. Suddenly, every verse was being picked apart for signs of stolen inspiration. Meanwhile, M's legal team dropped another bombshell. They were pursuing not just financial damages, but full retroactive credit on the album in question. That meant changing streaming platforms, album liners, even physical copies. It meant every royalty Drake had collected over the past 5 years from that album could potentially be recalculated. The financial implications were massive. Millions could be lost, contracts could be voided, sponsors could pull out. And they almost did. One of Drake's major brand partners, a global sportswear company, reportedly paused a multi-million-dollar campaign set to launch within days. Sources inside the brand revealed that executives were extremely concerned about the lawsuit's impact on public perception. "We can't be associated with someone being accused of creative theft on this scale," one insider allegedly said. "This isn't just bad press, this is brand poison." Drake's response was immediate. In a private emergency call, he reportedly begged the brand to reconsider. "This will pass," he assured them. "The truth will come out." But they weren't convinced. And neither were others in his circle. Producers, photographers, and collaborators began distancing themselves, subtly removing tags, archiving posts, canceling planned work. Back in court, the mood was tense. M's team now had momentum, and they knew it. During a heated session, Drake's lawyers tried to block the submission of new audio files, claiming they were illegally obtained. But the judge disagreed. The files were admitted, and what they revealed made headlines across the industry. The recordings were from a private OVO session in 2018. The voices were clear: Drake, M, and two engineers. They were discussing a track that would later become a chart-topping single. M could be heard laying out the entire concept, melody, chorus, lyrical direction. Drake responded with approval, even suggesting title changes based on EMS input. It was irrefutable. Creative collaboration at the very least, and strong evidence of shared ownership. When those recordings were played in court, sources say the room was electric. Drake's legal team was visibly shaken, sat silently, staring ahead. The judge paused the session afterward and scheduled a closed-door meeting with both teams. What happened in that meeting has not been made public, but what came next was clear. The judge issued a formal pre-verdict statement, saying there was sufficient cause to anticipate a ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Fans were losing their minds. Social media exploded. Hashtags like JusticeForm and DrakeExpos trended for days. Celebrities began weighing in. Some showed support for Drake, others stayed eerily silent. But the most shocking reaction came from Drake's own family. His cousin, a lesser-known rapper, who had collaborated with Drake in the past, posted a cryptic message on his story. It read, "Loyalty isn't just a lyric." Fans quickly connected the dots. Was this an indirect call-out? Or worse, confirmation of the accusations? More importantly, why wasn't the family closing ranks? The silence from Drake's father, who was usually vocal on social media, was also suspicious. Insiders claim that, even within the family, opinions were divided. Some believed Drake was being targeted. Others were beginning to accept that there might be truth behind M's claims. Whatever the case, the house wasn't unified, and that only added to the chaos. And then, just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse, an anonymous source leaked a contract. Not just any contract, but the original agreement between Drake and M from years ago. The paperwork allegedly showed that M was promised partial ownership of any tracks, resulting from their sessions, a clause that was conveniently ignored when the album was released. The leak went viral instantly. Fans called it the final nail in the coffin. Suddenly, it wasn't just about music anymore. It was about ethics, about integrity, about the very foundation of an artist's legacy. Drake, once the untouchable hitmaker, was now facing what many called his biggest threat yet. Not from another rapper, not from a diss track, but from a courtroom. And as part 2 ends, one question hangs in the air like smoke. What happens when the world's most calculated artist loses control of the narrative? That's exactly what the world was watching unfold in real time. The headlines were relentless, the memes unmerciful, and the silence from Drake deafening. But behind the scenes, something darker was growing. The pressure wasn't just professional anymore. It was personal. And for someone who had spent his entire career curating perfection, the unraveling was unbearable. Sources close to the OVO camp described Drake as increasingly paranoid. He was reportedly convinced someone on the inside had betrayed him. Assistants were rotated, phones were confiscated, meetings were moved to undisclosed locations. One staff member even claimed Drake hired a private security consultant to sweep his Toronto mansion for bugs. He thinks someone's feeding info to the other side, they said. He doesn't trust anyone right now. And that paranoia wasn't without reason, because another bombshell was about to drop, and this time, it wasn't coming from the courtroom. It was coming from someone he once considered family, a former OVO artist, who had signed with Drake years ago under promises of creative freedom and support, suddenly spoke out. In an emotional hour-long podcast, he detailed years of frustration, exploitation, and control. But what stunned listeners most wasn't just his story. It was the fact that he backed M's claims entirely. What M is saying. He said, "I've lived it," word for word. The interview sent shockwaves through the music world. It's painted a picture of OVO not as a creative haven, but as a tightly controlled machine, one where credit was currency. And Drake allegedly decided who ate and who starved. According to the artist, several promising careers had been strategically buried to keep Drake's dominance intact. But then came the most jaw-dropping claim of all. The artist revealed that, during a heated conversation years ago, Drake allegedly confessed that he often rewrote other people's work just enough to call it his. Whether he meant it literally or metaphorically didn't matter. The internet exploded. Tweets poured in. Fans were stunned. Had Drake just been exposed as the puppet master behind a facade of collaboration? Emotions ran high. The family was left divided. And the reactions kept coming. Drake's mother, who rarely speaks to media, was reportedly deeply distressed by the fallout. Insiders claim she pleaded with her son to settle the case, warning him that the damage to his legacy could be permanent. "This isn't just a headline anymore," she allegedly told him. "This is who you're becoming in their eyes." But Drake, prideful and furious, still refused to fold. Instead, he called for a full counter-investigation, demanding a forensic audit of EMS claims, accusing the producer of orchestrating a long-term scam for fame and money. But the move backfired. M's legal team responded with even more receipts, including gun-reality video footage from studio sessions that had been time-stamped, geolocated, and authenticated by tech experts. The video showed M and Drake discussing specific lyric ideas, some of which made it into finished songs nearly word for word. It was undeniable. And it left Drake with fewer and fewer allies. Industry executives began distancing themselves. One label source even claimed Drake's upcoming album was being delayed because key collaborators had pulled out, unwilling to risk association. "Nobody wants to be the next one accused of ghostwriting," the source said. "This lawsuit has everyone terrified." And then came the final betrayal, one that no one, not even Drake, saw coming. A longtime OVO producer, someone who had been credited on nearly every project since the beginning, suddenly filed an affidavit. Not for Drake, but against him. In a brutal statement, he claimed he had witnessed the entire situation unfold between Drake and M, and he confirmed that Drake had knowingly and willfully excluded M from credits and royalties. He even provided calendar entries, private emails, and a voice memo where Drake allegedly jokes about remixing M's life story into a hit. The affidavit was a smoking gun, and Drake's legal team knew it. They reportedly held an emergency meeting that night, advising Drake that a settlement was no longer a suggestion, it was a necessity. One attorney allegedly said, "If this goes to a jury, it's over, not just the case. Your career." But Drake still wasn't ready to give in, and that's when everything started falling apart. The OVO label's senior project manager resigned. Drake's head of media relations quietly took an indefinite leave of absence. Tour sponsors began pulling funds. And a source close to the Drake camp revealed that the artist himself was experiencing severe mental and emotional burnout. He was said to be isolating, barely eating, rarely sleeping, and growing increasingly erratic in decision-making. His inner circle, once unshakable, was crumbling, and even fans were starting to turn. Online forums, once filled with support, were now flooded with debates. Some said Drake was being framed. Others called for accountability. But the loudest voices weren't choosing sides. They were simply shocked. Shocked that the man who once made heartbreak an art form, who built a brand on emotional honesty, was now being accused of silencing the very people who helped him build it all. And then, just when the storm seemed at its worst, M dropped a bomb. Of his own, he released a statement. Not through lawyers, not through the press, but directly to fans. In a midnight post on his personal blog, he wrote a letter titled "Truth Over Fame." In it, he detailed everything. How he met Drake, how they created music together, how he was promised credit and ownership, and how he watched it all vanish overnight. He described the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the years of silence that followed. The letter was raw, emotional, and deeply personal. He ended it with a plea, not for revenge, but for recognition. "I don't want to take Drake down," he wrote. "I just want the truth to matter again." Fans were floored. Comments flooded in. Support poured out. Even major artists reposted the letter. For the first time since the trial began, M wasn't just a name in court papers. It was a person. And in that moment, the public sentiment shifted again. But inside the courtroom, the final countdown had begun. The judge scheduled closing arguments for the following week. And word leaked that the tone would be final and unforgiving. The evidence had been reviewed. The witnesses had spoken. The public had chosen its side. The court date arrived under a heavy cloud, literally and metaphorically. Los Angeles was gray and overcast, mirroring the mood surrounding the biggest music industry lawsuit in years. Fans lined the courthouse. Steps, media vans circled like vultures. Security was tight. Everyone knew this wasn't just about royalties anymore. It was about legacy, about truth, about how far someone would go to protect an empire built on perfection. Drake entered the courtroom through a private entrance. No photos, no handshakes, just a cold, quiet arrival. He was dressed simply. Not a single chain. No entourage, no theatrics. Some insiders said he hadn't slept in 2 days. Others whispered that he was on the verge of a breakdown. Either way, the weight of everything, the accusations, the evidence, the betrayals, was written all over his face. M sat just a few feet away, calm, composed. But there was something in his eyes that spoke louder than words. It wasn't vengeance, it was closure. And for the first time since the suit began, the power dynamic had shifted entirely. The final arguments began. Drake's lawyers went first. They tried everything, questioned the timeline, challenged the authenticity of files, painted M as a bitter ex-collaborator clinging to old dreams. But their tone was different now. Gone was the arrogance, replaced by a quiet desperation. Even the judge noticed. She interrupted 3 times, urging them to stick to facts, not emotion. It was clear she wasn't buying it. Then M's team stood. Their argument was crisp, calm, and devastatingly effective. They walked the court through emails, texts, studio logs, videos, contracts, every piece of evidence stitched together like a tragic documentary. And then came their closing line, the one that would be quoted across the internet for days. "This isn't about money, it's about being erased. About how the industry turns people into ghosts when they're no longer useful. And how sometimes the ghost fights back." The courtroom was silent. The judge adjourned for deliberation. And for the next 2 hours, the world held its breath outside the courthouse. Fans refreshed news feeds, desperate for any leak, any whisper. Inside, Drake reportedly sat motionless, staring at the floor. Sources say he didn't speak to anyone, not even his lawyers, not even when his phone buzzed with messages from management, family, and friends. Then, the judge returned. The room stood. She read from a prepared statement, her voice steady, emotionless. She acknowledged the complexity of the case, the blurred lines of creative collaboration, the shifting definitions of credit in the digital age. But then she turned directly to Drake and spoke words that would become immortalized in headlines. "Around the world, you built a career telling the stories of others. Now, it's time to own that." The court ruled in favor of M. The fallout was immediate: gasps, sobs, silence. Drake's team looked defeated. M's lawyers embraced. Outside, a roar erupted as the verdict was announced. Fans screamed. Protesters cheered, and social media exploded. Drake had officially lost, not just the lawsuit, but control over the very narrative he had once commanded like a symphony. But the ruling didn't stop there. The judge ordered Drake to retroactively credit $1,000 on 4 tracks from the disputed album. He was also required to pay back royalties dating from the album's release, a figure estimated at over $11 million. Additionally, a public acknowledgement had to be issued, confirming EMS contributions and clarifying the misattributed credits. That acknowledgement would become its own storm. Drake posted it hours later. Short, clinical. No emotion. It's just a screenshot of a note reading, "I acknowledge M's creative contributions to album name and apologize for any misunderstanding." Regarding credits, it was the bare minimum. Fans called it hollow. Celebrities stayed quiet. Some reposted it with sarcasm. Others unfollowed Drake altogether. But the biggest twist was yet to come. 2 days after the verdict, another producer came forward anonymously at first, then another and another, all with similar stories. Drake had allegedly taken melodies, verses, or ideas from collaborative sessions, only to release them under his own name, with altered details and no credit. Suddenly, the lawsuit wasn't a one-time scandal, it was a pattern. An industry veteran called it a dam break. Within a week, 3 more lawsuits were reportedly in progress. Studios started reviewing their old session logs. Labels began rechecking contracts. A quiet panic swept the business. Drake, once the golden boy, had become radioactive. Nobody wanted to be the next name associated with the unraveling. OVO's offices reportedly shut down temporarily. Tour dates were postponed for logistical reasons. Drake's Spotify banner disappeared for 24 hours. A glitch, maybe, or maybe something more. Even his inner circle began to fracture. A Kiovo executive resigned. 2 security guards were replaced. And close friends stopped appearing in photos with him. His fans, too, were torn. Some still stood by him, calling it a witch hunt. Others said they felt betrayed not just by what happened, but by who Drake turned out to be when challenged. "We thought he was the emotional one," a fan tweeted. "But when it was time to show real emotion, he ghosted us." Drake, once the king of vulnerability, had gone silent at the exact moment the world wanted him to speak. But what hurt most wasn't the money or the judgment. It was the legacy. For over a decade, Drake had written his story through lyrics. Heartbreaks, losses, wins, comebacks. He was the voice of an era. But now, that voice felt different. Listeners said they couldn't hear his songs the same way anymore. Every verse came with a question mark. Every hook, a doubt. Who really wrote this? Whose story is this? And in private, sources say Drake was devastated. Not angry, just broken. He stopped taking calls, skipped out on meetings, stayed holed up in his Toronto mansion, writing, pacing, sometimes just staring out the window. One visitor said it's like he's grieving something. The version of himself he thought was real. M, meanwhile, was moving on. He turned down most interviews, declined major label offers. Instead, he posted a video just him in a home studio laying down a new track. No fancy cameras, no marketing, just music. And in the comments, fans cheered. Not because he had won, but because he had finally been heard. The industry learned something to dot that credits matter. That silence doesn't mean submission. And that even in a world built on power, sometimes the truth finds its way to the surface. And just like that, everything changed. What started as a quiet legal filing turned into one of the biggest scandals hip-hop has ever seen. Drake, a name once synonymous with dominance, emotion, and perfection, now finds himself in the middle of an identity crisis. Not just in court, but in the hearts and minds of the fans who made him who he is. Because this was never just about a lawsuit. It was about loyalty, respect, the value of creativity, and the brutal truth that sometimes even the biggest stars aren't who they pretend to be. But here's the real twist. This story isn't over. Will Drake ever speak honestly about what really happened behind those studio doors? Will he rebuild the trust he's lost? Or will more voices come forward? More ghosts with stories waiting to be told? We're watching an empire shake. And the next move? It's his dot. But what do you think? Was this all a targeted smear campaign against an artist at the top? Or did years of silence finally catch up to Drake? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear everything. Who's telling the truth? Who's lying? And what should happen next? Don't forget to like this video if you were shocked. Subscribe if you want every twist the moment it happens, and turn on notifications so you never miss a beat in this ongoing industry meltdown, because if this story taught us anything, it's that in the world of music, nothing stays hidden forever.